Hey guys, my name is Kathleen, former PCT thru hiker, avid Pacific Northwest day hiker, and the hungry hiker here on YouTube. Today I'm answering 10 of your most asked questions about my recent solo backpacking trip along the Pacific Crest Trail. I did a call out both here on YouTube and on Instagram asking you guys to send me any questions you had about my trip, and boy did you guys have some good questions. You might remember back at the beginning of August this year, I left to go solo backpacking the Pacific Crest Trail here in Washington. I hopped on the PCT at Snoqualmie Pass and headed southbound, or SoBo, for 17 days and 250 miles until I reached the Bridge of the Gods and hiked into Cascade Locks, Oregon. If you haven't checked out the videos from my trip yet, I put together a 3-part video series, which I'll include links to down below in the video description. So let's get into the questions, shall we? The most asked questions I got was about trip planning, like how did I plan my hike? How far in advance did I plan my hike? How did I research my daily mileage and the 10 sites I wanted to stay at each night? And what's my favorite GPS mapping app? Besides food and trip logistics, trip planning was the most popular topic in the questions you guys asked me. Trip planning, especially for a long-distance backpacking trip, can be really daunting and intimidating. So here's what I did. First, I looked at the calendar and figured out when and for how many days I wanted to be out on trail. I already knew the section of the PCT I wanted to hike, which was from Snoqualmie Pass to Cascade Locks, and I knew which direction I wanted to hike in, which was SoBo, or southbound. Then I started putting together an itinerary for my hike using the Far Out app, which is a popular navigational app featuring long-distance trails all throughout the world. I used Far Out back in 2018 during my first PCT thru hike when the app was actually called Guthook, and I've used the app on all of my long-distance backpacking trips since, including the Washington PCT section hikes I did, the Wonderland Trail, and my hike along the John Muir Trail earlier this year. This app is awesome, and no, I'm not sponsored by Far Out, but if they want to send me some free stickers, I'd be pretty stoked. Probably one of my most favorite features of this app is that you can use it offline. So when you're out on trail and you don't have service, as long as you've downloaded the trail map onto your phone before leaving cell or Wi-Fi service, you can get access to all the features on the app, including the map of the trail, elevation profile, a waypoint list, photos for most waypoints, and user comments for each of the waypoints. Trust me when I say that user comments for each of the waypoints are worth their weight in gold most of the time, so be sure to read them. As I was planning my hike, I pulled up the trail map on Far Out and created a route for each day I would be out on trail. As I was creating the route for each day, I would also look at waypoints in that particular stretch of trail, like landmarks, viewpoints, water sources, and 10 sites. Based on the distance and user comments left on the app for each of those waypoints, I decide which 10 sites in the area I'd want to camp at each night. Of course, creating these routes ahead of time before getting on trail was a loose plan for my trip. I'd make the ultimate decision on where I'd stop for water throughout the day and camp at night once I was out on trail. But it was nice to have a plan in place so I at least knew where I'd be heading each day. This also helped me with figuring out how many days in between towns I'd be hiking so I could plan and prepare any resupply boxes I'd want to send to myself out on trail. For this trip, I sent myself 2 resupply boxes full of food. One to White Pass, which I picked up on day 6 of my trip, and one to Trout Lake, which I picked up on day 10 of my trip. I did send another box to myself in Cascade Locks, but instead of food, this box had things I wanted for after my trip, like a fresh change of clothes, toiletries, and items I wanted to bring with me on the road trip I'd go on from Cascade Locks. And I guess you can say that my most favorite GPS mapping app that I use for my long distance backpacking trips is Far Out. Honestly, I wouldn't want to do my big trips without it. The second question I got and most asked was about trip logistics. So these questions kind of go hand in hand with the trip planning questions because part of my trip planning was figuring out how I was going to get to and from the trailhead. Trip logistics are going to be different for every trip you go on, depending on which trail you're hiking. For this trip, my friends drove me up to Snoqualmie Pass and dropped me off at the trailhead. Then from Cascade Locks, another one of my friends picked me up in town and took me on a week-long road trip after my hike through Washington, Idaho, and Montana. To get into town during this section of trail, I either walked or was picked up or caught a shuttle. At White Pass, one of my students, Nola, and her husband, Chris, set up some trail magic at the trailhead and then gave me a ride to both the Cracker Barrel to pick up my resupply box, shower, and do laundry, and then drove me down into Packwood for burgers. Coming into Trout Lake, there were local trail angels who set up a shuttle schedule, helping hikers get into and out of town. I was able to hop on a free shuttle both ways and made sure to give each of the trail angels who drove me into and out of town some gas money. And since the trail goes into Cascade Locks, I was able to walk into town from the trail by hiking over the Bridge of the Gods with all the traffic. Next question, do I train for my hikes? Yes. In addition to doing a number of training day hikes before my big trips this year, I also worked with a personal trainer and have had amazing results. I knew I was having a very big backpacking season this year, and I wanted to make sure my body could keep up with my mind. Now with over 500 miles out on trail, I haven't had one single injury. No ankle issues, no shin splints, no weird foot pain. I've actually felt the strongest I've ever felt out on trail this summer, and I have my wonderful personal trainer Drew to thank. Thanks, Drew. Since I had such a powerful and positive experience with working with my personal trainer, Drew and I decided to work together and created an 8-week physical training program specifically for my hiking and backpacking students in my program, the Confident Solo Female Backpacker System. This way, students in my program have access to the same tools I had when planning and physically preparing for my backpacking season this year. Next question was about camp chores. What do I do when I get into camp? When I first get into camp, first thing I do is I check out the tent site and I scout out the whole area and see where I want to set up my tent. Then once I figured out where I want to set up my tent, I set up my tent, I put together my sleep system, and then I get my tent organized on the inside with things that I need, like my sleeping clothes, or if I need to charge my electronics, I get all that stuff sorted out in the tent. And then once my camp is all sorted out, then I eat. I cook my meal usually by boiling water and adding it to a freezer bag and enjoy my dinner along with a sweet dessert. And then usually by that time I'm pretty tired and I go into my tent for the night. Sometimes I'll watch the sunset. And then once I'm in my tent, I usually use that time, if I'm not too tired, to go through my photos from the day and edit my most favorite photos. And then I'll also write in my journal that night about things that happened out on trail during that day. Most of the time I'm in my tent by 8 o'clock. So 8 o'clock is considered hiker midnight. Once I wake up in the morning, then usually nature calls, so I take care of business, and then I start to break down my camp. So I start with everything that's inside my tent and break down my sleep system, change my clothes into my hiking clothes for the day, start packing my pack, and then once I have pretty much camp broke down, then I'll eat breakfast, which is usually something really easy. I rarely cook breakfast in the morning because I just want to get out on trail for the day, make sure I have enough water until I get to the next water source, and then I start my day of hiking. So that's it. That's my camp chores. Next question, do you carry bear spray? And the answer is no. I do not carry bear spray and have not carried bear spray for any of my day hikes or overnight backpacking trips, and that's mainly because of the area that I'm traveling in. I don't travel in grizzly country. Now, if I were traveling in grizzly country, my answer probably would be different. But on the trips that I've done up until this point, no, I do not carry bear spray. Yes, I do take precautions. I'm making noise. If I see a bear or another hiker tells me that they saw another bear, especially if I'm by myself, I'll play my music out loud just so I'm making extra noise. But no, I do not carry bear spray. All right, the next few questions were about food. What's my favorite trail food? And did I take electrolytes? For this particular trip, my favorite trail food was honestly pickles. I know that sounds really weird, but when I was hiking the JMT, when we came up to Snoqualmie Pass, which is where the trail starts to go into Yosemite National Park, I remember taking a break up there, and it was a really warm day, and I had realized really the whole climb up to Snoqualmie Pass that all the snacks I had in my food bag were sweet. I was very sodium deprived. I didn't have any sort of salty snacks whatsoever. So by the time I got to the top of Snoqualmie Pass, all I wanted was a pickle and some pickle juice. And at that point, I would have paid anyone $20 for a pickle. So I knew this particular trip that I was going to bring pickles, and I'm so happy I did. So the first section of the trail, I brought with me these single serving packs by Sucker Punch Gourmet of dill pickle chips, and they were so freaking delicious. It was the one snack that I would look forward to every single day out on trail. And then for the next 2 sections of the trail, in my resupply boxes, I'd actually bought a jar of pickles and divvied up the jar and put them in screw top containers. So that way I had plenty of pickles to eat along with drinking the pickle juice. And yeah, that's my favorite trail food on this trip, and it was wonderful. Do I take electrolytes? Yes, absolutely. For every trip that I go on, I always pack electrolytes. I will typically do 2 electrolytes per day. And this season, my electrolyte of choice has been liquid IV hydration packets. They're amazing. They taste really delicious. They come in a number of different flavors. and I just love the way they make me feel. If I'm feeling a little heat exhaustion coming on or feel kind of a dull headache coming on, I'll pop one of these in my drinking water, and within an hour I feel amazing. Another food question I had was, did you get sick of anything in your food bag during your trip? There was something that was in my food bag that I got sick of. Normally I don't eat bars on trail, but when I was hiking the JMT earlier this year, I decided to try some new bars. So there's these bars called Think, and they had a lot of high protein in them, and they had a bunch of different flavors, so I tried them out. They were really good. I decided, because I had liked them so much on the JMT, that I would pack them as a second breakfast for my PCT section hike. And I'd probably say halfway through my section hike on the PCT, I actually got pretty sick of the Think bars. And that's just because I had so many of them this summer. Nothing against the Think bars, they're absolutely delicious. I just ate too many of them. Another question I got was, how do I keep my chocolate from melting on trail? Honestly, I have chocolate that melts on me all the time. How I prevent it from being a crazy mess is I try and keep it buried deep in my food bag. So I use an earth sack. I'll put all my food in my earth sack, and then I keep my earth sack inside my pack. So I try not to keep my earth sack in direct sunlight, and then that way the food inside stays as cool as possible. Also, if I'm bringing something that melts pretty easily like chocolate, I always like to eat that within the first couple of days of being out on trail. Another question I got is, did I have to deal with wildfire and trail closures? On this particular section of trail, I did not have any wildfire or trail closures that I had to deal with. I started my trip at the beginning of August, so I was out on trail August 1st through August 17th. And luckily during that time, there were no wildfires, there was no smoke, the air was clear, so I really lucked out. Now, there were a few burn sections out on trail that I did hike through over these 17 days that I was out on trail, but those were from previous years' wildfires. But no current wildfires were active on this section of trail while I was out there, and the entire section that I hiked, all 250 miles, was open and none of it was closed. There were no reroutes. What was really cool about this section is coming out of White Pass, there was a section from White Pass all the way up until Goat Rocks or Knife's Edge that was actually closed when I was through hiking on the PCT in 2018. And this year it was open again. And that's because there were 2 active fires on that particular part of the trail back in 2018. So in 2018, after we went over Knife's Edge, we were actually rerouted onto an alternate trail to get into White Pass. So this year, on my southbound section hike, I actually got to hike that section, which was really awesome because I didn't get to hike it in 2018. Now, what wasn't so awesome was a lot of that section was a burn area, but it was still really beautiful up until the point of getting into the burn area, and the actual burn area wasn't that big. Favorite or worst moment out on trail? Ooh, this is a really good question. The worst, well, I don't really like the word worst. I would say probably the scariest part for me on this section of trail was the big water crossing that I had to do. It was the day before I got into Trout Lake, and there was a creek called Adams Creek. The water was flowing very fast. There wasn't really a clear path as to how to cross this creek. It was just kind of like a choose your own adventure water crossing. I got to the water crossing later in the afternoon, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to cross. First of all, I was by myself and I was really nervous. So I just changed my shoes from my trail runners to my Teva sandals, because those are my shoes that I like to do water crossings in, just because I don't want to get my trail runners wet. And my Teva sandals, they have really nice grip on the bottom, and I feel pretty confident and safe doing water crossings in these sandals. And then I just kind of waited and scouted out the area to see where I was going to do this water crossing. Luckily, not too long after I changed my shoes, another hiker had come up behind me and was already going across the water. So I watched him and where he crossed, and there was a couple different sections where you had to cross over a log, and then there was the middle of the creek, and then there was actually a part that he got into the water. So I didn't really want to get into the water, but I didn't really see another alternative to getting across the water. Before the hiker had started the water crossing, I told him, hey, I'm by myself, I'm really nervous, I'm gonna watch you and where you go, and then can you just wait just to make sure I get across safely? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So I basically followed his footsteps and where he did the crossing, and that last section going across the creek, I got into the water, and The water was super silty, not clear. You couldn't really see the bottom. I mean, even if it was clear, you wouldn't be able to see the bottom because the water was going so fast. But once I got into the water, I could feel the rocks were really slippery. The current was super powerful and the water went up to my thighs. Like, it was the highest water crossing I had ever done. Like, out of all the water crossings I'd done in the Sierra, this was probably one of the scariest water crossings I've ever done. I was really incredibly thankful that this hiker was on the other side, waiting for me, cheering me on, telling me that I got this. He had his arm reached out in case I fell, and luckily that section wasn't very long and I was able to get across the water safely. But I was really shooken up once I got to the other side. Like, once I got to the other side and I was safe, I could feel my anxiety just really build up, and I had to catch my breath and take probably a half-hour break on the other side because I was just so scared. So yeah, that was the scariest part of this section. My most favorite part of this section was probably going up over Knife's Edge through the Goat Rocks area. That was so incredibly beautiful. First of all, I decided to do this section at sunrise. So the colors were insane and there were just incredible views all throughout this section. This was also a scary section for me as well because after Knife's Edge, I decided to stay on the PCT as opposed to taking the alternate and hiking up to Old Snowy. Old Snowy would be a steeper climb up some loose rock, but there wasn't any snow. Staying on the PCT or the stock route, there would actually be 2 snow traverses. So I stayed on the PCT and I did the first snow traverse without any sort of micro spikes, and it was pretty scary. The second snow traverse I actually had my micro spikes with me, and just to feel more comfortable, I put them on, and I was really happy I did that because it was a pretty steep drop off going over those traverses, and you slip, there's really not much that's going to stop you. So having my micro spikes on actually made me feel much more confident doing that second traverse. And then I just kept them on because there was another snow traverse coming up after the PCT stock route where the Old Snowy and the PCT met up again. All right, so I have a bonus question here. This question is tips for first-time solo female backpackers? Absolutely. I created a whole online backpacking program about it. So if you haven't heard about it already, I've created this online backpacking program specifically for women called the Confident Solo Female Backpacker System. The Confident Solo Female Backpacker System is a comprehensive online self-paced program designed specifically for women to help them go from feeling scared and intimidated about solo backpacking to feeling comfortable and confident with planning their trips. And if you'd like more information on the program that I've created, click the link in the video description below to learn more about the program. So those are the 10 most asked questions you guys sent to me about my recent solo backpacking trip along the Pacific Crest Trail. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy trails and keep on trekking.